Forgotten Bombs, Bali 2005, deals with suicide in the context of suicide bombings. Death and murder feature. Please take care while listening.
Previously on Forgotten Bombs, Bali 2005.
We also don't want to lose all the evidence that may be on these people, that these people may have. I got every international flight for the next 2 days met by federal police with questionnaires for people because we just didn't know who or what we were actually looking for.
I fight against the police. 2 policemen injured because of me, but they arrest me alive. Because they need me alive. They want to know why I disagree, why I different from the others.
Have you seen Colin and Fiona Zwolinski? Then she pointed down to the piece of paper. Their names were written in the deceased column. From 9.6 Digital, this is Forgotten Bombs, Bali 2005. I'm Joe Frost. If you ever wondered what it feels like to be blown up, well, it hurts. In the days following the bombing, my body just ached. My legs were scratched raw by the sandblast, but the overall feeling of pain pulsed from within. As best I can tell, it was a result of the shockwave that had come from the explosion. A wall of energy strong enough to knock a person to the ground, which feels like a full body punch. Particularly on that first day, at Sanglar Hospital, I winced a lot. Rolled my shoulders, shifted my neck, made the kinds of movements you do when you're in pain and trying to trick the body into thinking that you can half-heartedly stretch your way to a cure. After spending the morning at the hospital, I returned to the hotel, where I was told we would depart Bali that evening, but there was a doctor on the phone who wanted to speak to me before I went to the airport. The doctor on the line explained that he needed to give me a once-over, ensure I was alright, and give me medical clearance to fly. He had been kind, caring, and compassionate, and so I want to emphasise that I said what I said next with absolutely no malice, but it's still not something I'm particularly proud of. With all due respect, Doc, fuck your clearance. I'm on that plane. My tough talk did about as much as you'd expect. Nothing. And so I received another checkup that afternoon, with the focus being what effect the holes the bomb had blown through my eardrums would have on the flight. In a nutshell, the doctor said, it would not only be fine, my perforated eardrums actually meant that the change in pressure as the plane climbed to cruising altitude wouldn't affect me at all. No more eardrums meant no more popping eardrums. So I guess that was a win. Beyond the physical aches, which would fade in short order, I had an existential question that has never been answered and so never really gone away. Why was I alive? There had been 18 of us from Newcastle on Jimbaran Beach, so when I replayed the events that had unfolded, I couldn't pinpoint exactly who was situated where when the second bomb went off and the shrapnel flew. The information I had for certain was my immediate vicinity, at the northern end of the table. To my left had been Penny Anisic, with her husband Paul standing behind her chair. They were both now in Singapore, which spoke to the seriousness of their injuries. To my right had been Colin and Fiona Zwolinski. They died on the beach. In the middle of all that carnage, I had come away with blown out eardrums. Beyond, wow, that's lucky, I had no explanation for how it was that I had ended up in a hospital bed. Or in the morgue. Why am I alive? That one doesn't go away. But it's hard to have too much sympathy, even for yourself, when that's the struggle you can't seem to get on top of. Because a lot of people were not alive. Isaac Zwolinski was 17 years old when he and his mates from St Francis Xavier's College in Newcastle made the trip to Bali. The boys had spent the first few days surfing, swimming, and enjoying the island's party scene.
At the time, that's what we were doing, and we'd had like 2 or 3 nights out before that. We were 17, so it was like the first time going out, drinking bintangs and smoking those, what are they called? Gadangs, those rank cigarettes they used to have over there. Yeah, it was good fun.
Ben Zwolinski was 14. He arrived in Bali on the 1st of October 2005, a few days after his older brother, having spent the days prior on holiday in India with his parents.
I remember just arriving, getting an airport transfer, busy streets, kind of just being a passenger really, just says what's going on, and then getting to the hotel room, Zachy popped in and said g'day. I think we went for a quick walk around the streets and then came back and like, all right, I just all of a sudden felt tired and went to sleep.
With their youngest son sleeping off the effects of a long flight and their oldest son happy to chill with his mates, Colin and Fiona Zulinski made the decision to join the rest of Team Newcastle for dinner on Jimbaran Beach. As word began to filter back to the hotel that a bombing had occurred at the very spot his parents had gone for dinner, Isaac waited up, watching the news with his mates, occasionally looking in on his younger brother.
Checked in him a few times that night and didn't wake him up because you don't think that you'd never think in a million years what's happened. We had the TV on all night, we were awake all night, and they had mum on the TV, and it was like a thing that kept going, and she looked okay, like from what we could tell, like. So we sort of thought, oh, she must be okay. She just looks like she's been, like others have, bloody, but not as bad. But she was obviously dead in that video.
Having slept through the night, Ben Zwolinski awoke on October 2 to the news of the bombing. Still, the conversations he was having that morning were all reassuring. Until they weren't.
We were just hanging out in the pool, we were talking about it. It was like, oh yeah, I think everyone's okay. Yeah, surely everyone's okay. Like, that was the conversation. And I never felt anything odd, but I think because of our age, I think perhaps some of the parents were wise to what was going on before we knew. And everyone kind of had a meeting with some AFP officers, and we went in and they gave us the rundown of what was happening. Show us your passport so we can get you on the flight, etc. We'll book you a flight, all those types of things, get everyone on the same flight out. And then we're just like, oh yeah, where's mum and dad? And then everyone in the room just like panicked, opened their eyes and like, they're unaccounted for was their words.
Unaccounted for. It's hardly a definitive means of saying someone is dead, particularly not to a pair of teenage boys. I asked Isaac if the phrasing had left him feeling ambiguous, even hopeful, about his parents' fate, or if it had been clear from the outset what unaccounted for truly meant.
Yeah, that was like them telling us, yeah, mum and dad are dead. Like, that was like, to me, it was very clear, like the way, I can't remember the exact words, but that was sort of it was pretty clear to me. Yeah.
Isaac and Ben flew out of Bali on the evening of October 2 with the rest of the group from Newcastle. An aunt met them at Sydney Airport and took them back to the house in the surfside suburb of Merriweather that their parents had made a home, but would never again set foot in. That's not to say the boys were alone, however, as friends and family from across the globe rallied around them.
We had so many people coming through the house, and all great intentions and worry and things like that of I don't think the flowers were showing up yet, but fuck, there was some flowers going through the house at one stage. And then, family members coming in from my uncles coming from everywhere and their families coming. And then we just felt like we just had because obviously it feels like we had there was just a revolving door out the front of people coming and going and just spending time together and things like that, which is some of the best times when you're in grief, is just like being, everyone pulls together and just is with everyone.
Also among the visitors were police officers.
We had more AFP officers or police of some description come to the house and find hairbrushes, toothbrushes, razors and things like that to test for DNA to DNA match the bodies. Then I think we got like 100% confirmation, a few days later that this was your parents and they've now deceased.
Colin and Fiona Zulinski were no longer unaccounted for, and so their two sons needed to tend to the formalities of death. Sorting their parents' estate, their father's business, and their own home were financial challenges that would take years to settle. But looming far larger on the horizon was their parents' funeral. Saying goodbye to the people who raised you is an awful prospect at any age. But for two teenagers, who had both their parents taken from them in the most violent manner and on such a public stage, it must have seemed impossible. But Ben got up in front of more than 1,000 mourners at Newcastle's Christchurch Cathedral, Isaac standing beside him, and that 14-year-old boy spoke with grace, compassion, and wisdom well beyond his tender age.
I just felt like I had to. I don't know, I'd done a bit of public speaking at school, at school assemblies or whatever. I felt like I was in a good headspace to do it. It came naturally, I suppose, is the best way, and the words felt right. I felt it like it was a powerful message, and for me to get up there and to show that we're kind of doing okay, but it's pretty fucked what happened.
You do remember some of the things you said?
Yeah. The one particular was they were taken from us by people who do not know love, or something to that sentiment. And that was the one that remained true. Like, I always tried to take a stance of not to be angry, it's just to more confused as to why you did it. It's set in deep with me. It was more about them than it was ever about us. It was never really. They weren't targeted or anything like that. It was a random bombing. It's just horrific that it happened to us, to both of our parents, particularly.
I'll never forget that day. I had been so full of anger and sadness, just torn apart by the sheer injustice of everything that had happened. And yet here was the kid who had lost the most, far more than I could even fathom. And he was speaking of the need for love, refusing to give in to the anger he had every right to feel. If I can say so, I was proud of Ben Zulinski that day. I was not the only one.
He did the eulogy, which it was so proud of him for doing that. He took it on, and he's into public speaking and he's good at it, but still to do that, yeah. I did my grandma's years later, and that was the hardest thing I've ever done. And that was not just my grandma, but someone very close to me, but to do it for your parents, like, God, yeah. I was struggling just to stand up there with him, yeah.
Now, 20 years later, I asked Ben if he ever thought about those people, the ones who did not know love, who took his parents from him and his brother.
The guys who had the backpack on, probably not so much. Visualizing that kind of, or thinking about that, makes me obviously quite sad. But thinking about what message are you sending? What are you trying to say here? I do make an attempt not to feel angry. I'd rather live in confusion than anger, I suppose.
As for Isaac, does he think of the people who so cruelly forced his life down this unforeseen path?
No, not at all. I've tried to understand why people would do something like this, but this isn't what I've gone through. It's not their problem. They've created it. They're not going to help me, so there's no point really worrying about them. I've sort of just always try to focus on myself, otherwise you're not going to get anywhere with it. So it's only going to get you upset.
Isaac told me of his gratitude to all the people who helped them over the years. Ben said that in becoming an orphan, his family actually grew bigger, as aunts, uncles, cousins and friends drew closer in profound ways. But for Isaac and Ben to come out of this tragedy and grow into good fathers, good husbands, good mates, speaks volumes of the people who raised them.
Dad had a at one point he had 300 employees, so he worked overseas a lot. But he'd love taking us to sport on a weekend. That was his thing. He would try his best to make as much time for us, which wasn't enough when we were young, but at the time he sort of put things into what he had going on at work. He did his best, and instilled a lot of different ways of looking on the world and his experiences. He was so well travelled as well, so he was so good at keeping relationships and everything like that, so he instilled a lot of that on us.
Mum was she was a nurse and midwife, and she was very fit and loved running, had done a few triathlons, more family orientated than I give credit to. And now I understand, having kids now, I understand, how nice it is to just spend time with family and stuff like that. So I often think I wish I got to know them better. Like it's such a cliche thing to say, and I think everyone needs to get to know their parents better, because it's I never got to have a beer with them at the pub or anything like that. I wasn't even fucking drinking coffee at that. I never went out for coffee with mum or dad. Things, those little small things that I missed and now miss.
Back in Bali, the grief emanating from what had happened on the 1st of October was coupled with the scary reality that the people who had committed these awful crimes remained at large. For the Aussie authorities, now that the affected Australians were home safe, the focus could shift to the vital task of bringing the perpetrators to justice. They already had two main suspects, Nordin Top and Azhari Hussein. David Craig was a detective superintendent with the Australian Federal Police. He was new to his role in counter-terrorism, but he was an experienced investigator. So he spent his first few weeks on the case in Canberra, which was a frustrating necessity.
I'm a very hands-on investigator. I like to be at the crime scene. I like to get a sense of things. I like to speak to people personally, but as it was, I was getting statements and doing interviews via interpreters. It was frustrating, but it was necessary to have that big strategic look over what was happening. As things settled down a bit as far as our response to human life, then I flew to Bali and picked up the reins there for the full command post there, where we still had a couple of FBI agents and AFP, well, obviously there, as well as the Indonesian National Police, and I took over command of that centre.
Did you defer to the Indonesian authority at that stage, given that it was on Indonesian soil, or was it your command?
Oh, no. They definitely have jurisdiction. They have command. We are simply there as advisors. We're unarmed. We only have expertise, and we can only give it if they want it. When I say command, I was in charge of all the AFP that were in Bali, and I was the main interface with the higher-ranked members of the counter-terrorism team in the Indonesian National Police.
One of the first lines of inquiry they pursued was to look at how the bombs built by Azhari had been set off in previous attacks he had been involved in. And a common factor had been using mobile phones as a detonation device.
The first thing we're going to do is we look at cell dump information. We're looking for the last phone call made before that bomb went off, or simultaneously. So how many phone calls, where the phones were. And of course, we're talking about very, very large population of people. So we're having that analysing through that, looking for it. What we didn't know was Azhari, as clever as he was, he had decided to completely change away from that method and use direct detonation. So we spent a long time looking for, or some of my investigators and analysts spent a long time looking for things that weren't even there. So we couldn't actually find how the bombs were detonated. He'd also moved away from large truck bombs, which had predominantly been. He'd changed the type of explosive that he used then. So it was for the first time they were using TNT, which burned a lot more efficiently. So we didn't get a good blast residue to identify the makeup of chemicals, where those chemicals could have been purchased from, who purchased those chemicals and things like that. It burned a lot cleaner.
Along with international law enforcement agencies, including the AFP, Indonesia's dedicated anti-terrorism unit called Detachment 88, and even the FBI, a completely different perspective had been brought in to help solve this crime. Former member of Jamaah Islamiyah, Nasir Abbas, who had witnessed Nordin Top and Azhari Hussein swear their allegiance to JI, came to Bali to help bring down his former charges.
I feel I blame myself because the person who did the bomb used to be my student, I know before, especially Nordin and Azhari. I know them, and they still continue. So I feel unhappy, I feel frustrated, I feel guilty. So this is motivate me to help the police to stop them. So when the Bali bomb 1 October 2005 happened, police bring me to Bali, and I stay in Bali for more than 1 month. Yeah, every day, every single street, every single trash we open, we look, and then later we found a piece of paper in the trash. They scratch, they're drawing something, they're the word. The police don't understand, and I understand what the meaning. That's why I helped the 2005 incident.
As is generally the case in solving crime, there was no real eureka moment. Scraps of paper found in the trash and at the scenes of the crime served to help, but they were small pieces of a large jigsaw. There were, however, 3 pieces of the puzzle that would prove hugely consequential, and they were found almost right away. The grisly remains of the suicide bombers.
The heads had been found in each bomb site, which they quite often are because, using a backpack, it will usually just take out the middle torso. What bombers do is, or what they did in this case, is they walk up and turn their back to the blast area, so they're actually using their body as a shape charge, so the blast will go from the back of the body towards the people. So they identify their targets, turn 180 degrees and then detonate. But the blast then leads usually from the hips down and from the mid-shoulders, mid-neck up. We retrieved those heads with the Indonesian police, of course. I wouldn't have done it, but the Indonesian police immediately put these photos on posters and on TV and everything around the place, and they were extremely gruesome, and no one recognised them because these heads are completely deformed. So no one was going to recognise them. It was very important to be able to identify who the bombers were. It's just a very important line of inquiry. So I spoke to our head of forensics as to what he would be able to do. So I sent them up to Jakarta, and they were going to, or they did, rebuild the heads. So they actually deglove the head. They actually take the skin off the skull, rebuild the head to the shape it would have been, and then put the skin wrap, if you like, back over the head and then re-photograph.
With the heads of the bombers recreated, the new photos were sent out across Indonesia, asking for anyone who may have information to come forward. The leads came pouring in, including one from a small village in Java. A villager said a photo of one of the bombers looked just like a local man, who had suddenly disappeared earlier in the year. A local man who came from a big family and attended a religious boarding school. A local man who had grown up, married, and had a child. The lead was followed up and, using DNA evidence, they were able to confirm the identity of the bomber. His name was Saleh Ferdos. Identifying Saleh Ferdos was a strong lead. The police could start to follow up on his final months leading up to October 1. Where he was and who he had been with were the kinds of answers that could lead to the capture of those responsible. One of the first people they managed to track down and bring in alive was a 28-year-old university student named Muhammad Khalili.
He was sort of the protege for Azhari, the Indonesian police, because whenever there's going to be uses of force there, the AFP aren't involved because we're not police there, and we're unarmed consultants, if you like. So we pulled away, and there was a shootout at the Semarang bus terminal. They captured Khalili, and he had a vest ready to detonate at the time, and he just didn't do it. And when I interviewed him a couple of days later, I said, "Why didn't you detonate?" He said, I just wasn't ready yet.
While he was not ready to end his life, Khalili was ready to talk. On the 9th of November, just short of 6 weeks after the 2005 Bali bombing, information from Khalili led Indonesian police to a small home in a suburban street in the city of Batu in East Java.
A guy, I won't mention his name, Indonesian police officer I know, yelled out through the loudspeaker saying, Ashari, we know you're in there, you need to come out, we have you surrounded. And that was answered simply with automatic gunfire coming from the house almost immediately.
After years on his trail, the Indonesian police finally had Dr. Azhari Hussein cornered. He was not going to surrender peacefully. Nor was he on his own. A young devotee known as Armin was alongside Azhari. And while Armin had barely spent 6 months as part of Al-Qaeda in the Malay archipelago, he was ready to die for the cause.
During what was a tit-for-tat volley of machine gun fire between the police and Azhari and Armin inside the house, the curtains were getting torn up, there was bits of concrete flying everywhere, there was smoke everywhere. There had to be thousands of rounds, or there were thousands of rounds exchanged. And then Azhari it all goes quiet. And he yells out that he's been injured and he can't move. This is the time where he's putting on his suicide vest. And so the police, tactically, they move forward, get closer and closer to the building, hoping he's going to come and give himself up, or he's wounded on the floor as he says he is, only to have a bomb thrown out the window at them from Azhari. So he put a vest on, he'd assembled the last parts of another bomb and thrown them through the window at the police. And fortunately, it didn't have a shrapnel component. There was only the shockwave. No one was actually hurt, but a hell of a shock. And he followed that with another 10. There was 11 bombs in total thrown by Azhari at the police. He used everything he could to try and induce the police to come in so he could kill more people. He had been previously shot. There was blood trails and marks where he had been writhing around on the floor where he was injured, and he couldn't activate his vest. And his instructions to Armin, as best as we can ascertain anyway, given that no one was inside that house, was for him to put on the vest and activate a delayed detonation time and open the door and then run at the police. And knowing that he was going to get shot, but he might get close enough to then detonate himself and then kill as many of the cockroaches, as they call them, as he could. But unfortunately for Azhari and Armin, and quite fortunate for all of us, he actually flicked the wrong switch and detonated himself instantaneously, which definitely killed Azhari. Azhari was alive at the time of that bomb, I'm sure, because of the markings of the blood in the house prior to him being blown up.
Dr. Azhari Hussein, one of the 2 most wanted men in Indonesia, had been put out of commission. It was big news. Quintin Tembi has spent his career researching politics in Southeast Asia, and in November of 2005, he just happened to be studying in East Java. Naturally, he visited the house where Azhari had met his end.
It was very unremarkable. It was a quite secluded mountain, not quite a villa, but a small house in the hills above the East Javanese city of Malang, where I was studying at the time, which is a hill town resort. So it's where Indonesians go for the cooler weather, and there's fruit orchards in the area and swimming pools and recreational resorts and that kind of thing. And so that's the area. It looks as though that's where he might have planned the second Bali bombing from, tucked away in the sort of a windy street winding through the hills there. And I remember going past and seeing the remnants of the siege of the police operation there, and seeing some of the damage to the building and so on, and the cordoned off area. But I remember also at the time there was definitely an effort to cordon off knowledge of the presence of terrorists there from the public. And so it wasn't widely known. It was widely reported in the Indonesian media, but there was also an effort, as I think there always has been, to sort of shield the public from any details of what might have happened.
While the house had been torn apart by 11 bombs, police found more than 30 other explosive devices, similar in construction to those used on October 1. Azhari and Nordin, it seems, had further plans. Also found among the debris was a laptop. It was a treasure trove of information, including the Bali project, the planning document referenced in a previous episode. There was also video footage of the 3 suicide bombers filmed in the days before they committed their final acts. Misno, the first bomber on Jimbaran, asked his family to ensure his worldly debts would be repaid. He believed his act of violence and murder would guarantee him eternal paradise, but only if he was all square financially with the people he had borrowed some cash from. Ayub Hideout, who attacked Raja's cafe in Kuta, thanked his mother and spoke of how the truly rich are those who are rich in their hearts. Finally, Salek Ferdos, who had destroyed our table, addressed his family with a message of hope, saying, "My brother and wife, God willing, when you see this recording, I'll already be in heaven. Don't even think the people who kill in the name of God ever die. They are living." It took a few weeks, but eventually, the restaurants on Jimbaran Beach reopened. Life goes on. But as he worked side by side with his colleagues in the Indonesian police, many of whom were Muslim, David recognised that one of the most powerful stands this international force could take was, in fact, sitting down. They would eat dinner together at Nyoman, the very cafe where Team Newcastle had gone for dinner on October 1.
So it was the first night that had been opened. I wanted to make a statement because the way things work with these terrorist groups, there's always sympathisers, there's always people that spot for them or are a part of them, and I wanted to send a message that Australians aren't going to be bullied, and so I booked the very table that you would have been sitting at that night, and I invited the Indonesian police as well. It wasn't a particularly a very relaxing meal, but it was, for me, as an Australian, I want to stick it in the face of these pricks. If anyone was watching us, to realise that we're a determined, good people and we're working with the Indonesians and we're trying to track you down and we will find you. But it was a message, and it was, there was shrapnel marks on the table and none of us really felt like eating, but we sat there and we talked and we just showed a unified front.
Gotta ask, they never brought my dinner. How's the food?
Oh, look, I think we might have yours in an evidence bag. I'll see if I can get it for you if you like. No, it's a very good restaurant.
Next time on Forgotten Bombs, Bali, 2005.
Once I saw the fellow, I just felt very sad for him, is what I felt. I didn't feel any anger or directed at him. I didn't feel it, I just felt sorry for him. He was somebody's son who had been talked into this.
If you're not trying to carry out attacks, and you just stop doing things, you can effectively avoid the authorities for many years. And I think that's what Nordin found, and that's what he did.
This atrocity had not just killed people, but it had utterly upended the lives of the survivors. And I thought, look, there's got to be a way of helping people.
Forgotten Bombs, Bali 2005 is written, produced and presented by me, Joe Frost. Audio production by Elliot Beavis. Original music by Dan Flegg. Cover art by Alita Letterwash. To check out Alita's piece in its entirety, as well as for a list of sources, episode transcripts and more, head to our website, 9.6.com.au. That's number 9, POINT, number 6. You can find David Craig on Instagram at official Dr. David Craig. Special thanks to my family. All the thanks to Fiona. Forgotten Bombs is a 9.6 digital production.